Hey all you cats and kittens and all you non-binary fittens, it's your boy DBiddles. Welcome back to the Brick Edition. So hey, in case it wasn't blisteringly obvious, I'ma put together a robot out of Brand X interlocking construction bricks while talking about whatever silly short topics suit my fancy. The Brick Edition videos are actually a spin-off of my primary series ChatBots, where I do the same thing, except I have kind of a more focused main discussion point, and instead of bricks, I'm assembling a plastic model kit of an anime mecha series, which usually has some kind of thematic connection to my overall point for the video. So check those out when you get a second. But anyway, let's start this. Whoa! Oops! I accidentally spilled a big jar of stupid weeb juice all over my script. Oh no! All the topical, insightful talking points about current events and politics that I had written down are all smudged and smeared with a bunch of anime nonsense. Aw man, and I had a bunch of really important stuff to talk about, like the death of Henry Kissinger, and the recent unveiling of documents pertaining to Jeffrey Epstein, and Yemen and the Houthis, and Jackson, Mississippi's secret cop graveyard, and Spider-Man 2 getting maliciously snubbed for Game of the Year by some silly little unknown title that couldn't possibly be better than the latest superhero punching simulator, Spider-Man Too Fast Too Furious. Damn it! I guess I have no choice but to talk about nothing but anime in this episode. Ah, man! Alright, first up, Yu Yu Hakusho on Netflix. Now, longtime viewers might remember some of my earlier episodes involved discussing how I'm at least positively inclined towards the concept of live-action anime adaptations, and that I went through a list of announced projects and gave some predictions on how I expected them all to turn out. Previous videos have also declared my enthusiasm for being wrong in my prediction regarding Netflix's One Piece adaptation, which turned me from someone lukewarm about One Piece into someone actually kind of into One Piece. A good adaptation makes fans happy while turning non-fans into new fans after all. So how did Hakusho fare? Well, while I was quite happy to be wrong about my prediction with One Piece, I am quite disappointed to be wrong once again with my prediction for Hakusho. I had hoped that its early arcs could be adapted fairly faithfully into a somewhat streamlined, abbreviated feature film, but unfortunately the 5-episode adaptation truncated the early arcs in service of skipping ahead to a truncated version of Yu Yu Hakusho's famous Dark Tournament arc, and this decision did not serve any part of the narrative particularly well. So let's start with the positives. The series looks pretty good, all the characters look like they should, the sets look pretty good too, the effects are pretty decent given Japan's more conservative spending on cinema production. After all, they don't sink hundreds of millions of dollars into projects like James Cameron or the MCU typically do. Psst, I actually just learned that the Japanese film industry doesn't pay its film crews all that well, so that's actually a negative thing. Sorry. The roughly 10 seconds of the spirit world outside of Koenma's room that we get to see are actually pretty neat looking, and the fight choreography is pretty rad and exciting, so long as you're not the type of person who needs fights to pause every 30 seconds to explain how everyone's superpowers work, which is apparently the peak of excitement for your typical shonen fan. Alright, what else did I like? I guess that was it. Unfortunately, past that, I don't have a lot to recommend about the series, and sadly, I don't find that sufficient to judge this a worthwhile adaptation. So the thing that I really enjoyed from my time watching the anime was the characters and their dynamic interactions played against their struggles. Yusuke's a too-cool-for-school ruffian with a smart-ass mouth and defiant personality that gets him into constant trouble with authority figures, but he has a heart of gold underneath that even a lot of the people he butts heads with recognize. That's the tragedy of his character, the starting point to his growth. Despite a lot of people writing him off as a ne'er-do-well who will never amount to anything, and despite him leaning into their perceptions of him as part of his self-destructive, self-fulfilling prophecy, there are people who recognize he's got far greater, grander potential that he and his critics have completely overlooked, and the fact that he and society at large are choosing to write that potential off rather than nurture it are the main thematic thrust of the narrative. His good heart is so strong but buried so deep under his tough guy persona that he actually surprises the cosmic wheel of fate and the afterlife by sacrificing himself in a selfless act of heroism at the start of the series. As such, he is offered the opportunity at earning a second chance at life if he can complete a few redemptive supernatural tasks that act as an apprenticeship in a potentially positive path forward for his life as a spirit detective, as an Anime-Yuyu, as an exorcist of evil spirits. And this journey leads him into contact with a handful of kindred spirits, fellow hoodlums and rapscallions who are more than they seem and just need to be given the opportunity to prove themselves, as well as a number of allies who take the roles of mentors, older siblings, and surrogate parents. Meanwhile, many of Yusuke's enemies are people whom society has failed, similar quote-unquote bad eggs who did not receive the support and redemption Yusuke did, or even those who were nurtured early on, who lost their moral compass and fell off the righteous path, but believed themselves to be righteous people, or who believed their advantages entitled them to do as they pleased. I'll confess that I actually don't really care for the tournament part of the Dark Tournament arc, or indeed most of the action sequences, but I loved hearing the characters bicker and banter and grow as people little by little throughout the series. Yusuke, Kuwabara, Kurama, and Hiei are all lovable scamps underneath their sharp tongues and rough exteriors, and I much prefer the character moments to the parts where they throw hands. But here, sadly, much of the character moments are drained from the script and the performances. Yusuke doesn't get much opportunity to be anything besides a pouting, broody, stoic lead who looks like a Japanese version of Steve Harrington. He does heroic things, but I don't really feel him being a hero, I just feel him going through the motions. And that could be said of most of the cast. The script doesn't allow for much in the way of character or emotions, it just wants to wheel all the pieces from one set piece or bit of exposition to the next. Botan barely has any screen time, Koenma does nothing but watch and talk about how the magic-y magic stuff is getting bad. Hiei never really demonstrates much of the personality that makes him a fan favorite. Kurama's politeness and reserved nature come across as just not having much of anything to say or think. And Kuwabara, one of my favorite characters, the lovable dork who's the weakest of the four boys but one of the most plucky and determined despite that, has like one funny moment where Keiko sucker punches him in the dick, and besides that and his cool theme music, has basically nothing else going on for him. That's another thing. Would it have killed them to include some rendition of Smile Bomb, the anime's opening theme song, somewhere in this production? And again, the plot just feels like it's rushing through itself, except when it stops to linger on some unnecessarily long action sequences. The fights are well choreographed, but for as in a hurry as it is to get to dramatic high points that it hasn't earned, it also seems to have no problem spending way too long letting our heroes do battle with throwaway villains. And while the fights are pretty good, it feels like some of the length could have been sacrificed if it meant developing our players. Yusuke doesn't have to quest to earn his resurrection, he just goes to Koenma's office. Koenma says, "Alright, cool, you're alive again. Hey, can you check out this weird magic stuff for me when you get back?" And that's about it, no character growth needed. I don't want to spoil for those who haven't experienced the series before, but the biggest, most dramatic moment from the Dark Tournament arc of course happens here, but it feels hollow because it happens to a character we barely know, whereas when it happens in the anime, we've been with this character for much longer than just 10 minutes. And therefore, the resolution of the adaptation's plot with the defeat of younger Toguro and Yusuke's triumph over forces internal and external feels pretty shallow in comparison. Yusuke never has to grow or change or learn, he just has to wait for the plot to say, okay, now it's time for the next thing to happen. Which is why in my proposed plot synopsis for a hypothetical film, I stuck to using much lower stakes villains so that you could focus the narrative on the protagonist's growth rather than their conflict with the antagonist. About the best developed character in this is Sakyo, the evil, wealthy business guy who doesn't fight at all but is organizing the plot to unleash demon bugs on Earth. And even then his reasons are, I'm rich and bored, so I'm doing this to make life on Earth more exciting and cutthroat because I believe in social Darwinism and hardship making things blah 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 blah. Yeah, okay, guy, you got to the very top by doing horrible things, and now that nothing challenges you and you're empty inside, you have to do more horrible things in order to feel anything. Have you tried ever escalating submissive sadomasochism instead? Because you could do that. I don't know if it'll get another season. I rather suspect not and hope not, because the series didn't seem interested in adapting the story or characters. It just wanted to throw the big iconic moments up on the screen and didn't really care to do them right or proper. This is pretty lazy pandering, pure and simple, taking some nostalgic, well-regarded property and hoping to wring a few more yen out of it for the holders of the IP. Though it doesn't go as far as an American production would, setting up big expectations for some cinematic universe or long, multi-season runs, this is just a quick, hey, remember this thing you love? Well, here's all your favorite bits recreated in shallow, barely engaging fashion. Buy some merch, you content-hungry cattle. So I guess if it's gonna be so contemptuous of its audience, it at least isn't ambitious enough to keep it going for very long. I guess at least with this adaptation, no one can blame the problems on a bunch of dumb Americans who just don't understand Japanese storytelling, or are trying to pander to identity politics. This is just straightforwardly not very good. It's hardly the worst anime to live-action adaptation I've ever experienced, but as a fan, I can't help but feel disappointed. But if you feel differently, let me know in the comments. For me though, I recommend sticking to the anime. In fact, rumor has it an anime remake might happen, so maybe you can hold out for that if a series from 30 years ago is just too ancient for you. Kinda wild that of the two properties, the one that so far has had the most successful adaptation is One Piece. Who the fuck saw that coming? Speaking of, One Piece is getting an anime remake as well from Wit Studio. Or rather, a second anime adaptation, which will air while the first anime adaptation from Toei is still chugging along. And the manga isn't done yet. Okay, so that means before the anime reaches its final chapter, it's possible it will have 3 different adaptations of itself running concurrently. Now, this is a pretty unique case. Obviously, everyone's heard the jokes about One Piece being very, very long, though the manga itself isn't actually particularly long or long-running as far as serialized manga go. More on that later. And as long as the Toei anime adaptation is, it also is not longer than or longer running than other anime. All it is one of the last of the long anime series, and as far as most American anime fans are concerned, it is the last of the long anime. The last of the dinosaurs, the last relic of a bygone age. What do I mean by this? Well, let me explain. Okay, so Dragon Ball is often considered way too long for most outsiders to watch through, so new anime fans either start at Dragon Ball Super or just skip the series entirely. The original anime is 153 episodes, and Dragon Ball Z, the sequel series, is 291 episodes, giving you a total of 444 episodes. Now, even if you choose not to watch DBZ and instead watch the abbreviated version DBZ Kai, that's still 167 episodes, which leaves you with a total of 320 episodes. The manga story that this was all adapted from is 42 tankobon volumes. And that doesn't include all the various movies and specials, the 64 episodes of GT, which aren't canon, and now Super and the upcoming Dragon Ball Daima. That's a lot of fucking Dragon Ball. But nobody's all that intimidated by Fullmetal Alchemist. The original anime, which diverges from the manga, is 51 episodes long, and the more manga-accurate readaptation, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, is 64 episodes long. Now, a little bit of the beginning of Brotherhood is abbreviated because the material was covered in the original anime, which eventually went its own way when it had to meet episode demands without having the rest of the manga to adapt from. But even if you chose to watch both series, that's still only 115 episodes and maybe 2 movies if you want. Now, FMA's manga is 27 volumes. All of those 27 volumes fit into 60 to 80 or so episodes worth of anime, while it took Dragon Ball, at best, 320 episodes to play out its manga story that's only 15 volumes longer. What's the deal? Is it because FMA is just a better paced, better written, better told story? Well, yes. Sorry. I meant to say yes, But also, the reason is FMA was part of the era of seasonal anime, whereas Dragon Ball was consistently on the air for the entirety of its run. So, see, The Simpsons is a pretty long-running series. It's been on the air since December 1989, and has 760 episodes to date under its belt. Probably a couple more by the time I post this video. That means they're averaging 22 episodes a year, but since they only air one new episode a week, there's 30 weeks of the year they're just not posting any new episodes. Each season of the show lasts for just that, a season. There's an on-season and an off-season. During the off-season, or just on regular weeknights, they air reruns of the old episodes, and the new ones are just treats for... Goodness, I can scarcely imagine who's still watching that show at this point. But you get it, Dragon Ball's original anime went through its 153 episode run from February 1986 to April 1989, whereupon the original DBZ's 291 episode picked right up after that and ran until January 1996. So 153 episodes over 164 weeks and 291 episodes over 351 weeks. So during this 8-year period, there was only 71 out of about 412 weeks, or about 9 weeks a year, wherein Wednesday night would roll around and Fuji TV wouldn't have a new episode of Dragon Ball to watch. Manga chapters get published on a weekly basis, which is frankly insane given how much work goes into just that portion of this process. But depending on how many chapters you have before your manga gets picked up for adaptation, and how those chapters are paced, it doesn't leave your anime a lot of wiggle room should your mangaka get sick and need to take some time off, or develop writer's block, or go on vacation, or whatever. And further, making a whole-ass episode of animation from scratch, even if you use all kinds of tricks and cost-cutting measures to cut your work down, is no small task either. But at least it's done by a team, or a committee, or a studio instead of one dude and 1 or 2 assistants. So if someone from the studio is out with the flu, you can still reliably get an episode to air, no big deal. Both industries work their talent way too goddamn hard and expect way too much out of them, but between the two, one of those can more steadily get work done than the other, and unfortunately it's the one that needs the other's work to adapt from. And when you consider how many man-hours go into each and every episode of an animated program, how much time is spent scripting, storyboarding, dubbing, editing, painstakingly drawing each and every cell of animation, just weeks and weeks of work just to get a single 22-minute episode to air, not to mention most teams and studios are working on multiple shows simultaneously, it's little wonder why animators are so frequently complaining about burnout. And then on top of that, this one particular show only has 9 weeks of leeway in a year. Well, it's just not good for anybody. And this is hardly an in-depth or comprehensive look at the animation industry, but just think about your own job and how much stress and uncontrollable hardship and general headaches go into doing what you do that an outsider has no appreciation of, and you can kind of get an idea. But that's why so many of these older, longer, continuous anime series would have filler episodes where the anime makes up some bullshit that didn't come from the manga just to fill time. Or they would have episodes where, like, very little happens and the characters just very intensely do nothing at each other for a whole 22 minutes because the situation is just so delicate and exciting that one false move could mean the end for our heroes. Now, older anime fans already know this, but younger fans who are used to the seasonal model where only 12 to 26 episodes of their favorite anime gets put out in a year, if even that, they might not recognize it. Now, the seasonal model has its disadvantages, such as animators getting overworked even harder by jumping from project to project umpteen times a year to meet even more insane work quotas and deadlines, or some anime adaptations ending premature of their manga's conclusion because ratings weren't high enough. But as far as finished product goes, it does tend to be a more concise, more deliberate storytelling experience when the anime is all said and done. None of which excuses overworking your staff, and if they're getting underpaid like Japanese film crews are, that's a big fucking problem. Toei's One Piece has been chugging along since October 1999, and has, at time of writing, almost 1,100 episodes to its name. It's suspected that One Piece has stuck to the continuous model over the seasonal model because the broadcast network Fuji TV refuses to give up that weekly time slot so that some other network can steal viewership away. The manga and the anime have both entered what creator Eiichiro Oda has described as the final arc of the series, meaning it's winding down, but who even knows what the fuck that means? The most recently completed arc, the Wano Country arc, ran for 16 volumes of the manga, or from anime episode 890 to 1085, which is fully fucking bonkers if you're not a diehard One Piece devotee. The manga, which started in July of 1997, has 107 volumes currently, which indeed sounds like a lot, but consider that JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, whose manga has been plugging along since January 1st, 1987, is currently at 133 manga volumes, and the 2011 anime, which covers the first 80 volumes, is only 190 episodes long. Psst, I did some math, and of the 1,261 weeks that Toei's One Piece has existed, only 176 of those weeks did not produce a new One Piece episode, so about 7 weeks a year. Whereas JoJo's Bizarre Adventure has been around for roughly 535 weeks, and it's got 190 episodes, so yeah, that's really bad, Toei. That's really bad. Meaning that Oda and Toei Animation have been absolutely busting ass to produce all this material over the past 20-some years. Meanwhile, Araki and David Production have been able to more casually and leisurely produce what they have over the course of 40 years and 13 years respectively. So, I'm kind of muddling my points here. I guess what I'm trying to say, firstly, is that there absolutely is room for One Piece to abbreviate itself as a story, despite all the stuff that fans insist is completely necessary, and hopefully this new anime can come in at under 500 episodes from start to finish. But secondly, and most importantly, Jesus fucking Christ, Japan's work culture is absolutely suicidal. Good God, let these poor souls rest. The reason Japan has an aging population is because they're working all their people into early graves rather than letting them go home and fuck each other. Well, that and their restrictive xenophobic attitude regarding immigration, but that's another conversation. Yeah, that whole last segment's a bit of a mess, isn't it? But anyways, Fist of the Northstar is also getting a reboot. Now, for those unfamiliar, which I assume is a lot of you, Fist of the Northstar is a hugely popular and influential anime manga franchise from the 80s that kind of paved the way for a lot of the big shonen battle anime that you know today. Before One Piece, before Hakusho, before JoJo, before Dragon Ball, Naruto, One Punch Man, and Saint Seiya, there was Hokuto no Ken, or Fist of the Northstar. Now, it's not super well known here in America, but this is a pretty big deal title over in Japan. Enough so that it's a pop culture mainstay that has been getting new media pretty consistently ever since the manga first debuted in 1983. And as for a plot synopsis, basically it's Mad Max if Mel Gibson was Bruce Lee and he did kung fu that makes people's heads explode. Sounds pretty cool, right? There's more to it than that, obviously. There's a lot of soap opera drama, a lot of big muscly men who monologue at each other about the utility of strength and honor and revenge and defending the weak and destiny, and there's something prescient about a post-apocalyptic story where mankind's own hubris has brought us to the brink of extinction, and rather than learn the lessons of old, we just continue to let greedy men hoard resources and make life miserable for everybody else and blah 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 blah. Did you hear the part where I fucking said kung fu what makes people's heads explode? Do you really need more than that? Okay, you probably do. Look, this one is probably going to appeal a lot to the same people who like either JoJo's Bizarre Adventure or Dragon Ball, which is admittedly something of a hard sell because, well, the fan bases for those two series make them really annoying to outsiders. You know, if the source material itself doesn't do that to you. But no, I really do think that it's at least worth a look. From Dragon Ball, you have the element of the whole giant dudes standing opposite each other, reciting dramatic dialogue at each other before screaming, tearing off their shirts, and firing off a torrent of utterly devastating brutality that splits the earth and shakes the elements. Except unlike Dragon Ball, the violence trends a lot closer to Mortal Kombat's cartoonishly juvenile fixation on buckets of blood, with people's torsos and neck stumps constantly being at risk of becoming spontaneous blood fountains. And meanwhile, from JoJo, you have the utter memeability of the totally ludicrous events and dialogue that are played completely straight-faced that they almost make you interested in the actual narrative, despite it being, again, comparable to a cheesy wrestling soap opera. From Kenshiro's regenerating jean jacket that he hulks out of whenever he gets mad, to the endless ways he can enact catastrophic bloody violence on the most cartoonishly irredeemable goons, to his "you're already dead" catchphrase, followed by the head of the target in question twisting and bulging like silly putty before erupting like a volcano of gore, to the way he angrily stomps towards bad guy encampments at a speed that ensures he only rescues imperiled villagers just in the nick of time, about 50% of the time, where the other 50%, at least one old person needs to be brutalized before he can step in and rescue everyone else. It all just works in this delightfully stupid way. As wild as it sounds, my kid actually really enjoys the show too. About halfway through my watch of the original series, they started paying attention to the actions and plot on screen and had me read aloud the subtitles to them. It's not exactly the type of thing you'd think a 5-year-old would be excited about, I know. You know, being a nerd, the temptation to immerse your prodigy in all your favorite fandoms is always present, but I decided early on that I didn't really want to do that to them. I figured they'd probably have a bunch of stuff they'd be drawn to on their own that more appeals to them personally and which they can better relate to their peers with, and that having their goofy dad try to instill in them a love for robots, superheroes, and monsters would be a surefire way for them to come to resent me and my love for Batman. But yeah, actually having my kid get organically excited about Kenshiro has been a fun little bonding activity that we can share by watching Fist of the Northstar together, playing the Yakuza-style PS4 game, and occasionally ripping off our shirts to scream and pantomime brawl with each other. Anyways, if you want to sample Fist of the Northstar to maybe get hyped up about this new anime, I heartily recommend the anime film from 1986 simply entitled Fist of the Northstar. It's a great little sampler platter of what you can expect that covers about half of the original anime series in a little under 2 hours. Which, yes, means the plot is incredibly truncated, but trust me when I say it's hardly a boring or hard to follow 2 hours. That way, if you hate it, you've at least gotten the gist of what it's about without wasting too much of your time. Physical copies of that movie are pretty easy to come by, or it's probably streaming somewhere. Now, if you want just a little tiny bite of what that movie looks like, I'll leave a link in the description to a 3-minute clip, and that can whet your appetite. If you need more than that, the complete original 152-episode anime series that ran from 1984 to 1987 is available from Discotek Media, with the manga UK dub for the first 36 episodes included. Though the run of the actual manga series was 1983 to 1988, so naturally the plot of the anime probably diverges at some point. I'll admit I haven't read the manga. The manga is being localized by Viz Media if that's more your speed. And I'd also recommend that video game I mentioned, Fist of the Northstar Lost Paradise, which adapts parts of the story of the series and integrates them into the original plot of the game. And the gameplay is, like I said, basically the same as Sega's Yakuza series, where half of it is brutal combat with endless hordes of thugs and rival martial artists, and the other half is a big sandbox adventure filled with ludicrous minigames and side quests. However you go about it, you can thank me later. You know, Fist of the Northstar is actually one of the highest grossing anime franchises of all time. My recent episode with Optimus Prime actually had me researching a lot of stuff about dollars earned by big media franchises, but I mostly focused on American properties since they made up the majority of the list. But since I was curious, because obviously America's perception of anime will be different than Japan's, I spent a little time looking over that subject specifically. Everyone over here is all gaga for My Hero and Attack on Titan and Jujutsu Kaisen, but what if those titles aren't as big over there as they are over here? I mean, it's been known to happen, folks. Voltron, The Big O, Speed Racer, Cowboy Bebop, there's a couple titles that are a little more prominent here than they are there, and vice versa. So I had a couple different sources giving me slightly conflicting reports, which I'll link in the down below, but here's a bit of what I found. Bear in mind, this next section was written before Godzilla Minus One hit theaters and blew everyone's shoes, socks, trousers, underpants, and epidermis off with his global box office dominance and atomic breath. So that's probably shifted things pretty significantly, but anyways. Okay, so Pokemon is consistently the highest grossing media franchise, not just from Japan, but of all time, with Wikipedia listing the following Japanese franchises, not just anime, but films, video games, and branded merch, in descended order. Anpanman, Transformers, Hello Kitty, Pac-Man, Street Fighter, Rilakakuma, Monster Strike, Dragon Ball, Demon Slayer, Super Sentai, Super Mario, Ultraman, the Fate series, Sonic, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Gundam, Beyblade, Genshin Impact, Hamtaro, Astro Boy, Godzilla, Resident Evil, Sailor Moon, Kumamon, and Yokai Watch. So, some surprises there. Kind of wild that more niche mascot characters like Rilakakuma and Kumamon are able to credibly rival Hello Kitty, though Hello Kitty obviously still tops them both by a wide margin. Oh, and then let's look at Anpanman, which is one of the top 10 highest grossing media franchises in the world. It's a children's book series about a superhero with a bean bun for a head that's been going since 1973 and has had multiple anime series and almost yearly anime theatrical films since 1988. Now, I knew about this series, but it's never really made much of an impact stateside, so it's kinda wild to think about how much money this is generating almost exclusively from domestic sales. And it's also topping some of the most famous, internationally recognized anime out there. Hamtaro's also a surprise. Now, for those who don't know, Hamtaro was a cute little manga and anime about a bunch of hamsters who have Rugrats-style adventures while their owners are away at school. Hamtaro actually did have a bit of an impact here in the US, with a little over 100 of the 300-some episodes of the anime getting dubbed for Cartoon Network broadcast back in the early 2000s, and a decent amount of merch and a couple of video games being sold in North America, but it was never all that big of a deal, so it's a bit of a shock to see its gross more than Godzilla. Yes, I did double check this one, and those rankings still stand according to my source at time of writing, so Hamtaro is making more money than Godzilla. But that was just what Wikipedia had to say. A couple other sites have listed other franchises, with some of them higher or lower than what was reported on Wikipedia. Digimon, Bleach, and Doraemon are also cited as being pretty high earners, which, yeah, that tracks. Pretty Cure, JoJo, Naruto, also strong showings, yup, alright. Kochi Kame Tokyo Beat Police turned up on the other two lists I looked at, and I had never heard of nor seen this anime before, so talk about a Japanese exclusive. And then we have Evangelion, One Piece, and Fist of the Northstar, with numerous accounts of a decent amount of Northstar's success attributed to earnings from branded pachinko machines, which is something. I don't know, something about the phrase, "Omae wa mou shinderu," apparently makes people susceptible to gambling. That said, I'm surprised Sazae-san, Lupin III, Case Closed, and Cran Shin-chan aren't present in any of these lists, given their anime's longevity, all of which are still currently running and have been running for longer than One Piece. Well, that's just anime in general. What about manga? Yes, I'd thought of that, viewer, so back over to Wikipedia I went. First, I looked at the longest running manga titles. I figured if they lasted longer, they must be pretty popular, hence why we're getting yet another Dragon Ball series all of a sudden. But, as it were, a lot of the longest running manga titles are stuff I had never heard of, and presumably neither of you, so I'm gonna keep this list to just the highlights. Number 1 on the list with 210 tankobon volumes is the notorious Golgo 13, which never had a formal conclusion, but will sadly not be getting any longer, as mangaka Takao Saito passed away back in 2021. And before you ask, it was pancreatic cancer, not COVID. Skipping ahead, number 3 on that list with 201 volumes is that Kochi Kame thing I mentioned earlier, and its 40-year manga run concluded in 2016. Number 6 with 149 volumes, Grappler Baki. Just under that with 147 volumes is Silverfang. Under that with 138 is a tie between Kinnikuman and Hajime no Ippo, or as we know them here in the States, Ultimate Muscle and Fighting Spirit respectively. Number 10, 133 volumes, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but the current arc JoJo Lands will surely bump it up a bit. Popular soccer series Captain Tsubasa in the 19th spot with 108 volumes, and it's not until we get to 22nd place where One Piece, with its current length of 107 volumes, makes an appearance. And trailing that in 24th place with 103 volumes is Detective Conan, aka Case Closed.
Okay, well, what about manga sales?
Yes, that certainly will make a difference, viewer. Just because Mary Worth and Prince Valiant have been running continuously since the 30s doesn't mean their audience is as big as, say, Radiant Black. So let's look at some sales charts. You might have heard, One Piece recently surpassed Harry Potter in terms of books sold, over 516 million, which is more than even Batman comics with an estimated 495 million copies moved. And under that, by a wide margin, is Golgo 13, with 300 million copies. And moving down from there, Case Closed, Dragon Ball, Doraemon, Naruto, Slam Dunk, Kochikame again reporting for duty, Demon Slayer, some cooking manga with 111 volumes titled Oshinbo, Bleach, Attack on Titan, JoJo, Astro Boy, Fist of the Northstar, everybody, Hajime no Ippo, and then two I've never heard of before, the Kindaichi Case Files and Touch. And then below that is everything with under 100 million units sold, so we'll not bother to cover them.
Okay, well that's just anime and manga, but Japan has other media. Surely some of their live-action stuff is pretty prominent, at least over there.
You know, you'd think so, viewer, but I looked at a list of highest-grossing films in Japan, and of the 45 films listed, only 17 of them were Japanese, with the rest of them being American films. And of those 17, only 3 of them were non-anime films, 2 of them being connected to some 1997 television show called Bayside Shakedown, and the other some film called Antarctica about sled dogs or something. But other than that, it's all anime and American films. But the #1 Japanese film released thus far, you guessed it, Demon Slayer Mugen Train, not bad for the manga having only debuted in 2016. Obviously, Mugen Train, having released in 2020, played some kind of role in it being so profitable not just domestically but globally, becoming the highest-grossing theatrical film of 2020. What precisely the factors were that went into making this specific film such a hit in the middle of a global pandemic, I'll decline to speculate. But it's wild to think that it did those numbers when none of the Pokemon films are even on this list. Anyways, right under that is Spirited Away, and then we start seeing America's presence on the list pretty quick. Titanic, Frozen, and then the anime film Your Name, the first Harry Potter film, Princess Mononoke, One Piece film Red, Howl's Moving Castle, the sequel to Bayside Shakedown, the second Harry Potter, Avatar, the first Slam Dunk, Ponyo, Suzume, Weathering with You, the Super Mario Bros. Movie, which is an American film of a Japanese property, Detective Conan Black Iron Submarine, Jujutsu Kaisen 0, and then from there down it's almost entirely American films with Antarctica in the middle and the other Bayside Shakedown and the latest Evangelion film somewhere near the end. Anyways, this is hardly the most comprehensive and all-encompassing view of Japanese pop culture. Obviously, video games are a pretty big deal in Japan, and there's surely other things like live-action television dramas and novels and music I could look at. And even with just this limited scope of anime and manga, there's some discrepancies between what I'm seeing from my primary source, Wikipedia, and some of the other sources I looked at, but I'm sure I'm already losing some of you with all this. There's only so much that can be gleaned as a cultural outsider from looking at charts and sales figures. But it's neat to see what another culture thinks of its own cultural exports in comparison to how it's received by the cultures importing it. As I've stated before, it's vain to think that just our limited American perspective on the mediums of anime and manga are sufficiently informed about the full scope of those mediums. I mean, this fucking Kochikame thing is apparently just the biggest stack of hotcakes over there, and most of us didn't even know it existed, didn't know we were living in the shadow of its fluffy buttermilk and dripping syrup. It also serves to highlight the utter pointlessness of obsessing over box office figures. You'll notice a lot of the entries on the highest grossing media franchise list were not represented in movie ticket or manga sales, despite having films and manga. Merch really is the kingmaker of the multimedia landscape, or microtransactions, as is the case in Monster Strike, Fate, and Genshin Impact. This was bore out in my Optimus video too, with only a fifth of the total financial yield of the Transformers series being movie tickets, with the other $20 billion being toys, t-shirts, bedsheets, etc. Which should all be further proof, if proof be needed, that smelly Nazi nerds like the Quartering or Critical Drinker or Geeks and Gamers, who obsess over box office figures and fucking pronouns, are just the biggest goddamn idiots when it comes to media analysis. Or more accurately, they're deliberately dishonest partisan hacks who are trying to push narratives of bigotry through arbitrary and meaningless numbers. Moving right along, Chainsaw Man. Now you might recall I was pretty stoked about the first season of the anime way back in my first Brick Edition video, and that's absolutely still the case. I was so stoked, in fact, that I eventually broke down and picked up the manga just because rewatching the anime 2 or 3 times just wasn't scratching the itch. And that's pretty uncommon for me. I haven't been all that hot on manga since my penniless bachelor days, when I'd go to the local library to check out some of the big-name shonen titles I'd missed in high school. Wouldn't you know it, the only one I'd really missed out on was Fullmetal Alchemist. Anyways, I don't typically bother with manga all that often. There's a couple I'm interested in. Yotsuba, Berserk, Claymore, Akira, Interspecies Reviewers. I'm scratching Pluto off the list now that it got an anime adaptation. Go watch that on Netflix if you haven't. But I haven't really gone out of my way to collect too many manga since high school. Even with other contemporary titles that I'm fairly excited for, I never find myself finishing the latest season of Dr. Stone or Spy Family and then thinking, ooh, now let's read the manga and find out what happens next season. But Chainsaw Man absolutely broke that streak. Amazon had a box set of the first 11 volumes on sale for pretty cheap, so I scooped that up. And looking at Amazon's listings, I could clearly see that volumes 12 and 13 were also on offer. Odd, thought I. Why would you bundle 11 volumes together in a special collector's box? That's such a peculiar number. Surely it'd make more sense to do them in groups of 5 or 10. The anime, as it currently leaves off, is somewhere in the middle of volume 4 of the manga, so there's still a decent amount for me to read ahead on, and hot tiddly damn, folks, there's some excitement ahead. The hyper-intense, balls-nasty spectacle violence does not drop off, but several more named characters certainly do. That's right, there's plenty more ape shit to go around. The highs get higher, and the emotional hits stay hitting, even when they're forecasted by earlier chapters of the manga. And it keeps a brisk pace too, which is good. Too many shonen battle manga get bogged down in their fights and make them overly long and overly expository in their attempts to make them seem bigger and more exciting than they actually are. Yeah, I said it, battle shonen are bad at doing battles. Fuck you, fight me. In fact, the pace is almost a bit too fast. Now, it never seems like we're rushing through things. There's plenty of downbeats where the characters can interact and develop and have dark revelations about the plot that slowly set in like they're sinking into cold water before a sudden burst of excitement can snap everyone to attention. It's all expertly written and cinematically laid out so that every step forward builds the world, the characters, and the plot in smart, deliberate, deftly crafted fashion. But as I neared the end of my box set, I could sense things wrapping themselves up in a very clear, very well-planned way. Plots coming full circle, characters completing their arcs, Chekhov's gun devil being fired, themes reaching their conclusions, the secrets of Makima and Denji and the chainsaw all coming to light, etc., etc. It all built to a brilliantly apocalyptic denouement and a climactic, fightful clash between our hero and the one who has set the plot in motion with a thematically appropriate finale. As I flipped through the back half of the 11th volume, I wondered, how can this be? This is a finely crafted finished product I'm coming to the end of. All the ambitions foreshadowed in the very earliest chapters have been met, all the threats dealt with in suitably grandiose and emotionally satisfying fashion. How can there yet be 12th and 13th and more still volumes yet to go? And then, on the very last page, End Part 1 Public Safety Arc. Yes, that's right, this entire narrative with a beginning, middle, and end was all apparently just Das Rheingold to some greater Nibelung cycle. Just the Hobbit before the Lord of the Rings. Hope you like Chainsaw Man Episode 3, Revenge of the Gun. Next is Episode 4, A Chainsaw Hope. And I'm not complaining, mind you, I'm just surprised, bewildered, awestruck, and flabbergasted. That final page upended all my storytelling instincts, and now I don't know what to think. I hope you're pleased with yourself, Chainsaw Man. You've popped my monocle, made the string quartet abruptly stop playing their Baroque music, cut down my chandelier, and upset my entire fancy dinner party. I thought I had my head around this narrative's dog-eat-dog world and the chainsaw Cerberus at the center of it. I thought this story had enough material to continue on with its initial set of stakes for far longer, but I've apparently only just scratched the surface of what it has to offer. So hats off to you, Chainsaw Man. You threw me a genuine curveball, and I have no idea what to expect next. But you can bet your boots Volume 12 is in the mail on its way to my doorstep. There's a new standard for Battle Shonen, and all the Kaiju number 8s and Kagurabachis better step up their game if they want to stay relevant. That said, Mashal, Magic and Muscles, is pretty decent also. Give that a peek if you're already on board with the Chainsaw Train. Moving on. I recently watched the first Macross film, Macross Do You Remember Love, for the very first time. It's a very cool film, beautiful animation, wonderful music, and a great job abbreviating and even adding to the original story arc of the original Macross series. I recommend it if you like big goofy robots like I do, or even if you're just interested in hugely important and hugely influential anime from the history of the medium. That said, you might have to do like I do, and do a little bit of One Piece roleplay to get it, if'n you catch my drift. A little bit of yo-ho-ho, a little bit of plundering and pillaging on the high seas of the internet, a little bit of bootstrapping your peg leg, you scallywag. You feel me? See, because while Macross is the Pepsi to Gundam's Coke and a massive ongoing success in Japan, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, it was part of a little series known as Robotech, which, while a divisive topic among anime purists, was one of the most important and foundational titles in getting more faithful and serious anime localizations here in the States. Robotech walked so that one day Bocchi the Rock could run on simulcast via Crunchyroll. So everyone, say, "Thank you, Robotech!" I'll just assume you said it. Robotech was a production of Harmony Gold, one of the earliest companies in the anime localization scene responsible for early attempts at localizing Dragon Ball and Captain Harlock. But while those other series flopped under Harmony Gold's efforts and the results have been lost to time, Robotech persevered thanks to the diligent efforts of one Carl Macek, one of the earliest and most influential American weebs. While most anime imported at the time was pretty heavily edited to fit American broadcast standards, or was at least kept episodic rather than serialized, Macek wisely chose to keep as much of Robotech faithful to the original, or at least he did with Macross, the first part of Robotech. Which is why you can watch Robotech the Macross Saga and have basically the same narrative experience as you would if you actually watched Super Dimensional Fortress Macross. And because of that, Robotech was a big hit and paved the way for other anime to get more faithful localizations. You know, 4Kids and Voltron notwithstanding. Everyone say, "Thank you, Carl Macek." But because Harmony Gold was involved and has been extra special clingy to their distribution rights, localizing the properties that made up Robotech has proven exceptionally difficult. Which isn't too big a deal for the other parts of Robotech. Super Dimensional Southern Cross has been a silent franchise ever since it was cancelled from Japanese broadcast early, and Genesis Climber Mospeada only ever had one follow-up in the form of a single music video / epilogue OVA episode. But like I said, Macross is pretty important, and there's a lot more of it than just what is covered in Robotech. Now there have been some exceptions. ADV briefly had the right to release unedited and more faithful versions of all 3 original Robotech series. Manga Entertainment and US Renditions both briefly had the rights to Macross 2 Lovers Again, and Manga Entertainment also distributed Macross Plus in both 4-episode and feature film forms. But these are all long out of print and were otherwise pretty hard up for that good stuff, lesson ye be plundering that booty where the X marks the spot, matey. Back in 2021, Harmony Gold and Macross's Japanese owners, Big West, Studio Nue, and Tatsunoko, finally sorted out their differences in a way that would allow Harmony Gold to retain the license to the properties, allowing for continued re-releases of Robotech, and also allow for US distribution of the rest of Macross via Nozomi Entertainment. Huzzah! Our suffering and neglect is over. Pour one out for the homies who died before they got to see this glorious day. Home releases of Macross 7, Macross Delta, and Macross Frontier were announced, and so far all we've seen is Blu-ray re-releases of Robotech for the umpteenth billionth time. Oh! Anime-Yuyu has since announced a Blu-ray re-release of Macross 2 Lovers Again, but I can still find manga entertainment DVDs of that one on eBay for a reasonable price, and not to talk ill of Macross 2, but how do I put this? Macross 2 is to Macross what Halloween 3 Season of the Witch is to the Halloween franchise. You know, it's okay for what it is, but it's not really canon and nobody cares that much about it. So, thanks Anime-Yuyu for Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, but I don't know, could you maybe try for something like Shonen Baku Sozoku or Gall Force? You know, just something I don't already have. But anyways, watching Do You Remember Love made me think of a couple other things while I was at it. For one, Macross has a lot of cool mechs that I'd really love to do builds of, but after my experience with the Valkyrie and my award-winning episode of Chatbots, I'm pretty wary of doing any more of those for the time being. Because while I'm quite pleased with the chat part of that episode and consider it some of my best work to date, the bot part not so much. The Valkyrie was a Hasegawa Corporation model, as are almost all of the current Macross kits in circulation, and frankly I'm afraid to touch my Valkyrie lest it fall to pieces or one of the few remaining waterslide decals come off. The thing is fit to rattle apart if I so much as look at it wrong. Some of my other builds thus far have been struggles, but at least they hold together pretty well and can be moved with relative ease. This thing though, not so much. I don't know, maybe I did it wrong. Maybe I'm just a scrub if a kit I'm working on requires painting and gluing. Though I legitimately do not know how anyone can defend waterslide decals, those things are fucking atrocious. But the other thing I thought about while watching this movie was how far English dubs have come in all this time. Yeah, that's right, we're going there. I like dubs. Fuck you, fight me. Do You Remember Love got localized in the US and Europe in a couple different forms way back when with different dub tracks each time. I can't be sure which one I experienced, I just know mine wasn't the Revenge of the Bionoids version. But as you might imagine, they were pretty busted dubs, as was the norm at the time. And I can understand why some subtitled purists might prefer the original Japanese in most or all instances of anime viewing, and they're entitled to that preference, but I think they need to shut the hell up about their supposed superiority to those of us who like dubs for a couple reasons. Number 1. The state of English dubbing is a completely different beast now as opposed to way back when. Most dub haters are living in the past when they talk about how terrible the voice acting is in English language versions. Bad dubs are things you usually have to go looking for anymore, and usually you have to be looking through much older stuff. Even gag dubs and kid dubs, like Ghost Stories, Digimon, Crayon Shin-Chan, High School of the Dead, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Sergeant Frog, don't happen anymore, though honestly, I kinda dig all of those. But if you're just tuning in for Spy Family or My Dress Up Darling, you're getting a pretty solid experience with pretty solid VAs who have been doing this a while. You're still allowed to prefer the original Japanese, but let's stop pretending that the dubcast can't act. Which brings me to... Number 2. How the fuck do you know that the Japanese seiyus are actually better actors? Bitch, you ain't fluent in Japanese, you need the subtitles on. You can't pick up on all the little nuances of the Japanese language and how the spoken word works over there. You're just judging based on tone of voice. How are you so sure that this is the most natural of dialogue when you just have to take the subtitles' word for it when they say run rather than sprint, or jog, or dash, or race, or gallop? Japanese and English don't translate one-to-one, dummies. If you don't believe me, actually listen to the dialogue as you read some subtitles, and note the difference in where people's names fall in the sentence compared to where it does in the English. Alright, get ready for this. Where English might say, I hope you become Hokage someday, Naruto, it might come out as, Itsuka anata ga Hokage ni naru koto o nagate imasu, Naruto. I got that from Google Translate, so that might not even be correct, and I apologize for my pronunciation. But you get it, right? It's entirely different syntax and phrasing that doesn't exactly make sense unless you know the language inside and out. Meaning there's probably a lot of subtleties in the performance that you, a clueless gaijin, aren't going to fucking notice. The intonation of voice might make sense, but you're not really experiencing the performance because you literally can't. And finally, number 3, sometimes dubs actually are better for one reason or another. Like sure, I'll admit that sometimes you're better off with the subs. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure springs to mind with the very zany delivery and the occasional bouts of English being part of the charm that is lost in dub form. Patrick Sates sadly never blurts out Zawardo in quite the same way. And obviously, when characters start singing, it rarely turns out well because either they switch back to Japanese, or if the song lyrics are stuck on the same audio track as the dialogue, the voice actress has to belt out some terrible English version of whatever song the character is singing. But I know that a bunch of you motherfuckers still cling to the old DBZ dubs and absolutely soy face over Goku's completely mistranslated "Ally of Good, Nightmare to You!" Or hey, how about stuff like Hellsing or Baccano, where all the crazy European or Brooklyn accents on all the characters actually come through, rather than having some Japanese person struggle to convey the character's nationality. Sure, we can't do Kansai accents, but they can't say, "Forget about it," without it sounding extra stupid. Or hey, how about Romeo x Juliet, where the Japanese delivery is absolutely incapable of delivering the bard's signature iambic pentameter when they start quoting Shakespeare directly. Do I need to bring up Cowboy Bebop? If you try to tell me that the Japanese is better actually, I'm gonna slap your dumbass silly, you lying fucking whore. Or hey, try to tell me that Mitsuo Iwata is funnier as Kintaro in Golden Boy than Doug Smith is in the same role. You can't. It's just not true. Some anime even get dubbed in English first, like Blood the Last Vampire or Space Dandy. My all-time favorite anime film, Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust, it actually debuted in Japanese theaters with only the English dub and Japanese subtitles. It didn't receive its Japanese language track until its home release in Japan, and as far as I can tell, there is no official release of the film in America that includes the Japanese language option. But you don't fucking need it because the dub is really, really good, guys. Some anime don't even receive a Japanese language track at all. I can't find a Japanese cast for Afro Samurai, and that's probably because nobody could be a suitable replacement for Samuel L. Jackson in not just one, but 2 of the leading roles of that anime. So it was English with Japanese subtitles for the Japanese broadcast of Afro Samurai. That's another thing, sometimes we get some pretty sick celebrity dub casting. Remember me mentioning Macross Plus? Yeah, the main character is voiced by none other than Bryan motherfucking Cranston. And most Studio Ghibli films have some pretty big-name Hollywood talents behind the dubs. And those are just the enjoyably good dubs. What about the bad dubs that make the experience worthwhile? Some of those bad line reads on older anime are just fucking classic. Just like, mwah, chef's kiss meme-worthy shit. Cyber City Oedo has one of my personal favorite lines in all of anime history thanks to the dub. "Get lost. You wouldn't recognize a goddamn vampire if one jumped up and bit you on the end of your fucking dick." Like, that's just fucking gold. Or like, the Devilman dub. "Is it okay for me to wear my shoes in here? I don't give a shit." Here's a challenge for you. Try watching Garzy's Wing subtitled without falling asleep, and then try watching Garzy's Wing dubbed without pissing your pants laughing. Neither one is the intended experience, but I know which one makes it worth the watch. Again, you can like whichever one you want, you can prefer whichever one you want. Just don't be a smug fuck about it, because at the end of the day, you're bragging over intellectually superior ways to watch cartoons. No one's impressed, dumb fuck. What's next? You're gonna cite your speedrun time for 100%ing Crash Bandicoot in your job interviews? You gonna flex your collection of X-Men comics to that Tinder cutie? Gonna demonstrate your mastery of the Klingon language to the Dean of Admissions? Gonna show your dad what you can do to the swimsuit on that statue of Uzaki-chan? You prefer reading your cartoons rather than watching them? Motherfucker, you like reading so much, read some goddamn light novels. It's equally unimpressive, but it's a more authentic experience if that's so fucking important to you. Maybe if you're really so smart, you can learn to read kanji and kana, so you don't even have to get your light novels translated, you pretentious geeks. Bet that's even more authentic. You keep on reading, meanwhile I don't have to pause Steins Gate to be texting your girl back. Anyways, this has been fun. Maybe we'll do another Oops All Anime episode in the future. A lot of things I can do with that. Maybe I could shout out some of my favorite non-violent anime series, or maybe remind people about the canon of cursed anime titles that have earned international infamy for their absolutely bug-fuck insanity. Or maybe do a tier list? I don't know. Anyways, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, and share with your mates. I'm DBiddles, and this has been The Brick Edition.